let's jump right into this. We often think of our minds and our bodies as two totally separate things, right? But to really understand why we feel, think, and react the way we do, we've got to look under the hood at the electrochemical machinery running the whole show. Today, we're diving into a really fascinating explainer that perfectly bridges our everyday, intense human emotions with the incredibly complex, microscopic biology happening right inside our heads. We are talking about the chemical mind, and specifically, the anatomy of a neuron. Okay, picture this. It's late at night, you're home alone, just kind of drifting off to sleep. You're right in the middle of a super pleasant dream about eating a giant bag of Fritos, when suddenly, bang, a massive noise at the front door. Instantly, you are wide awake. I mean, your heart feels like it's literally going to explode right out of your chest. You jump out of bed, ready to sprint out the back door, or maybe you grab a screwdriver to fend off the shadows in the hallway. Now, whether that threat is a terrifying weeping angel or just your neighbor looking to borrow a can of beans, it doesn't actually matter to your body in that exact split second. Why? Because that sudden noise just flooded your startled brain with an absolute typhoon of chemicals. Every single thought rushing through your head right then, the urge to fight, the urge to flee, the pure panic, it is all just the result of those chemicals. Everything psychological is biological. That is our quote, and really the central mantra for this entire explainer. It's simple, but man, is it profound. Our brains and our nervous systems are unbelievably nuanced. We like to imagine our mental activities kind of floating around in some abstract cloud, completely separated from our physical bodies. But the reality? Our moods, our brilliant ideas, those sudden impulses, they're all directly triggered by our biological condition. To truly grasp how our mind works, we absolutely have to understand the chemical influence our body has over everything we think and feel about the world around us.
To figure this out, we've got to start small, like microscopic small. It is all about the neurons. Neurons, or nerve cells, are the fundamental building blocks of our nervous systems. And while they share some basic structural stuff with other cells in our body, neurons have this incredible electrochemical mojo that lets them transmit messages to one another. Now, get this, you have different types of neurons all over your body. Some are tiny, a fraction of a millimeter long, while others literally run the entire length of your leg. But looking specifically at your brain, you have 86 billion of these tiny transmitters. 86 billion! We really need to understand how just one of these works to get how we dream, think, and react.
So let's step onto the factory floor of a neuron. Regardless of their size, all neurons share three basic parts. Step 1, the dendrites. These look kind of like bushy tree branches. Their whole job is to receive messages and basically gossip from other cells. They are the ultimate listeners, picking up signals and passing them along. Step 2 is the soma, or the cell body. Think of this as the life support system. It houses the nucleus, the DNA, all that essential cellular action. If the soma dies, the whole neuron dies. And finally, step 3, the axon. If the dendrites are the listeners, the axon is the talker. It's a long, cable-like extension that shoots electrical impulses away from the cell body and out to other neurons, glands, or muscles. Now, many of our neurons have a really crucial, brilliant upgrade called the myelin sheath. Depending on the type of neuron, that long talking axon might be encased in a protective layer of fatty tissue. It's exactly like the plastic insulation wrapping around an electrical wire. This myelin sheath dramatically accelerates the transmission of messages down the axon. When that protective insulation degrades, well, the electrical signals degrade too. That's actually what happens in conditions like multiple sclerosis, which eventually leads to a loss of muscle control. Okay, so an electrical signal is zipping down the axon, but where does it actually go? That brings us to the synapse, or the synaptic gap. When a neuron fires, an electrical charge rushes down the axon to the very ends, reaching out toward the neighboring neurons. But, and here is the crazy part, they never actually touch. No way! The bushy dendrites of the receiving neuron and the axon terminals of the sending neuron play the ultimate microscopic game of I'm not touching you. The tiny space between them, the synaptic gap, is incredibly small. We're talking less than a millionth of an inch wide. Since that electrical spark can't jump across a physical gap, it has to convert into a chemical signal. The electrical impulse triggers the release of chemical messengers that jump across the gap, like a tiny little kiss, landing on specific receptor sites of the neighboring neuron. These messengers are called neurotransmitters. They slide into the receptors perfectly, kind of like a key fitting into a lock. But they don't just hang out there forever. Once they've done their job of either exciting or inhibiting that receiving neuron, they sort of bounce off. The sending neuron then acts like a vacuum, sucking up all the extra leftover neurotransmitters. This absorption process is called reuptake. It's basically a chemical game of high five, nope, taking it back. We actually have over 100 different types of these neurotransmitters zipping around up there, and they generally fall into two main camps: excitatory and inhibitory. Excitatory neurotransmitters do exactly what it sounds like. They literally rev up the receiving neuron, increasing the chances it'll fire off its own electrical signal. Think of norepinephrine, which controls alertness, or glutamate, which is involved in memory. On the flip side, we have inhibitory neurotransmitters. These are the brakes. They calm the neurons down and decrease the likelihood of them firing. A major one is GABA, or, you've probably heard of serotonin. Serotonin heavily affects your mood, hunger, and sleep. In fact, low levels of serotonin are heavily linked to depression. Now, what's incredibly fascinating is how we can connect these invisible microscopic chemicals directly to our macro-level, everyday human experiences. Take dopamine. It's associated with learning, movement, and intense pleasure, but an excess of it is linked to schizophrenia and impulsive, addictive behaviors. Then there's acetylcholine, which influences muscle action, learning, and memory. Actually, the deterioration of neurons that produce acetylcholine is a key marker of Alzheimer's disease. And we absolutely can't forget endorphins. These are the neurotransmitters that make us feel amazing. It's that chemical bath your brain takes after a great run, or when you fall in love, or, let's be real, when you eat a really fantastic piece of cake. So, neurotransmitters are the speedy messengers of our nervous system. But guess what? They aren't the only chemical messengers in town. They have some serious competition from the endocrine system. If you've ever been through puberty, you know exactly what I'm talking about: hormones. Here's the big difference. The nervous system sends messages at lightning speed. It's like firing off a quick text message. The endocrine system? It takes its sweet time. If the endocrine system wants to send a message, it writes a letter, puts it in an envelope, licks a stamp, and drops it in the snail mail post. It secretes hormones directly into the bloodstream, where they slowly travel around to other tissues. But here's the so what of it all. Speed isn't always better. Your body remembers that snail mail letter way longer than a quick text. Hormones linger. This perfectly explains why, long after you realize that sudden bang at the door was just the wind, your heart is still pounding and your hands are still shaking. The physical feeling of fear lingers because those chemical letters just take time to fade away. So where are these lingering hormones actually coming from? Well, your body has several major chemical factories, which we call glands. You've got the adrenal glands sitting right above your kidneys, pumping out adrenaline for that fight or flight response, jacking up your heart rate and blood pressure to fight off a threat. Right next door is the pancreas, oozing insulin and regulating your blood sugar for energy. Up in your throat, your thyroid is regulating your metabolism. And of course, your sex glands secrete hormones like estrogen and testosterone, which deal with attraction, appetite, and aggression. All of these factories are absolutely vital, but there is one gland to rule them all. Hidden deep in the secure bunker of your brain is a structure that's literally only the size of a pea: the pituitary gland. Despite being so tiny, it is the most influential gland in the entire endocrine system. It releases growth hormones and oxytocin. That's the warm, fuzzy hormone that promotes social bonding and trust. But its real power? Its secretions act as direct orders to all the other endocrine glands. It's the master gland. Though, to be fair, it does ultimately answer to an even higher power in the brain called the hypothalamus. Okay, let's bring it all together. How does this build a complete picture? Let's loop right back to our jump scare at the door. You had absolutely zero conscious control over that initial panic. Your sensory input hit the brain, skipped all the deep analysis, and just screamed danger. The brain sent a signal to the pituitary gland, which then signaled the adrenal glands, which instantly flooded your body with adrenaline. That hormone washed through your bloodstream and went right back to your brain. Only then did your brain's higher processing finally catch up and go, oh wait, it's just the neighbor. Then it had to send out entirely new signals to calm everything down. It is a massive, continuous feedback loop: brain to gland to hormone to brain. Which brings us right back to our golden thread. Everything psychological is biological. Your intense feelings of absolute terror, your racing heart, your urge to run, and that eventual exhausted wave of relief you felt, all of it, literally all of it, was entirely dictated by this highly choreographed electrochemical exchange between your nervous and endocrine systems. So, as we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with a thought. If everything you feel, everything you fear, and everything that brings you joy is ultimately governed by this microscopic game of electrical sparks and chemical locks, how much conscious control do you really have over your own feelings? Are we all just along for the ride on our own biological roller coaster? It's a pretty wild thing to ponder, especially as we prepare to dive even deeper into the brain's actual structures in our next explainer. Let's jump